Well, welcome back to Face the Nation, and we're honored this morning to have joining us Zbigniew Brzezinski, who was at President Jimmy Carter's side as his national security advisor the last time an American president had any contact with an Iranian president. He is now with the Center for Strategic and International Studies here in Washington. Dr. Brzezinski, thank you for joining us. Let me just ask you a basic question. Can we trust Iran?
We can trust Iran the way we can trust any nation, and particularly a nation with whom we have had lots of disagreements. But think of the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union was led by leadership that killed millions of people. It acquired nuclear weapons. It was threatening us. We managed to negotiate with it. We managed to have arrangements which stabilized the nuclear arms race, minimized the prospects of war. We can do it with the Iranians, absolutely, provided we don't listen to advice that's extreme and pathological.
Well, let me ask you, what do you make of the new president of Iran, Mr. Rouhani, who came here obviously on some sort of a, wanted to put out some peace feelers. He and the president talked on the phone. What do you think about him? What's he up to?
Well, he clearly is an alternative choice, and I don't think he was the initial choice of the preponderant Ayatollah. But the Iranian public, particularly urban public, I think has sent everyone a message. They're tired of the confrontation. They're suffering from it. They would like it to be ended. They would like it to be ended reasonably and honorably. And we have to take into account the fact that this is a significant historical nation that has lasted for 3,000 years, has a glorious history. It's not a crazy nation. It's not a suicidal nation. It's a very divided nation because there is an urban, Western-type intelligentsia, middle class in Iran, and there is also the rural areas that are much more fundamentalist, sectarian, and anti-Western.
I'm sure, like me, you saw the reports, and when Rouhani returned to Tehran, there were actually some protests there. Somebody threw a shoe at him. Which I kind of think underlines what we sometimes forget. Foreign leaders have to deal with the politics in their nation, just like our leaders have to deal with the politics here.
Right, our leaders don't deal with shoes, thank God.
Yeah. Somebody threw one at George Bush, I guess.
Iran is a complicated society, but it is a society, if you look at the stats, the statistics, socioeconomic ones, in which women play a very significant role. We don't know it because we have such a black and white view of Iran, but they do. It is a very Western type society when it comes to the big cities. It could be, so to speak, quote unquote, as European, if things changed, as Turkey.
Prime Minister Netanyahu of Israel has called Rouhani a wolf in sheep's clothing. How will this go down in Israel? And
look, Israel has its own Hamas. The Palestinians are divided, and the Hamas is extremist, doesn't want to negotiate with anyone, wants to have total demands. In Israel, the situation is somewhat similar. There is an extreme right wing, of which the prime minister is the leader. But it is not a faction that is supported by the dominant majority of the Israeli people. The majority of the Israeli people are sensible, realistic. They know that peace is in Israel's interest. Mr. Netanyahu talks, if one were to take him seriously, as if he actually wanted a war, particularly between the United States and Iran. And I don't think most Israelis think this is a good idea. Most American Jews don't think it's a good idea. And I think most sensible people agree that eventually there will have to be an accommodation based on compromise and mutual respect.
What advice would you give President Obama, because it does appear we're on the brink, as it were, of some sort of talk, some sort of negotiations with these two countries over the future of Iran's nuclear program. What are the most important things here?
Well, I think the president, first of all, has to explain to the country, repeatedly, not just once, that things go wrong in the Middle East. It's going to be a massive, globally significant crisis, probably the gravest since the Cuban crisis, in the sense that its potential consequences will not be an atomic war, but massive economic and political disruption in a very important part of the world. This is in our interest to avoid. What is part of the good news is that other major powers, while perhaps competing with us, as Russia, for example, which would like to see our influence diminish, realize that the consequences of such an upheaval would be worse for them. So we have a putative coalition for peace, namely with the Western Europeans, of course, first of all, but secondly, with the Russians up to a point, increasingly with the Chinese. And I think if we stick with it, we might be able to preserve some sort of stability in the region by accommodating with the Iranians, by finding some compromise formula for Syria, and for pushing the Israeli-Palestinian peace process forward. But all three things have to happen. So it's going to be a tough job, but if we persist, if the president leads, if he's articulate and consequential, if he doesn't get swamped by advice from extremists, I think it can be done.
All right. Well, it's a real pleasure to have you, Doctor, and thank you so much. We hope you'll come back again.